The iron gate screamed as it slid shut behind him. Evan Carter slowed, keys still warm in his palm, the late afternoon sun bouncing off the white stone columns of the mansion he'd just locked up. The air smelled like freshly cut grass and chlorine drifting from the pool. Quiet, controlled, his world measured in square footage in silence. Then the siren chirped. One sharp sound, not urgent, just enough to claim attention. Evan turned. A patrol car idled at the curb, lights flashing without hurry. An officer stepped out, hand already resting near his belt. White, mid-40s, sunglasses hiding his eyes. The kind of posture that assumed the ending before the conversation began. "Hey," the officer called. "You live around here?" Evan felt it instantly, the shift, the invisible weight pressing down on his chest. He kept his voice even. "Yes, sir." The officer's gaze moved past him, sweeping the mansion, lingering on the gate, the security cameras, the driveway long enough to park 6 cars. His jaw tightened. "Mind telling me why you're leaving a property like this?" Evan lifted the keys slightly. "Because I own it." A smile crept onto the officer's face, thin and humorless. Step away from the gate. The cuffs were cold, too tight. Neighbors began to gather behind manicured hedges, phones half raised, curiosity dressed as concern. As Evan was pushed toward the patrol car, he caught one line drifting from behind him, low, casual, lethal. "Don't worry," the officer said. "We'll figure out who you stole it from." The trunk popped open. Evan's phone buzzed in his pocket unanswered. Inside the mansion, a security alert began recording everything. And somewhere downtown, a name was about to collide with a badge. The gate closed with a sound Evan Carter usually found comforting. A low mechanical hum, a clean metallic finality. Security. Order. Proof that what he'd built stayed where it belonged. He pressed the remote once more out of habit, watching the iron bars settle into place, then slipped his phone into his jacket pocket. The mansion stood quiet behind him. 3 stories of pale stone and glass, framed by trimmed hedges and tall palms. Evan didn't look back. He never did. He'd learned early that ownership didn't need announcing. The siren chirped. Not a wail, just a sharp, deliberate sound. Evan slowed. The patrol car rolled to a stop along the curb, tires whispering against the pavement. Red and blue lights pulsed lazily, reflecting off the mansion's front windows. An officer stepped out, adjusting his belt as he approached. "Afternoon," the officer said. Evan turned fully now. "Afternoon." The man was white, early 40s, broad-shouldered. His nameplate read Halstead. Sunglasses hid his eyes, but his posture spoke clearly enough. Feet planted wide, chin lifted, hand resting near his holster. "You live around here?" Halstead asked. Evan nodded once. "Yes, sir." Halstead's gaze slid past him, slow and deliberate, traveling up the gate, along the driveway, toward the house. The pause stretched. "That's so," Halstead said, "because we had some reports of suspicious activity in the area." Evan felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Not fear exactly. Recognition. "I'm not aware of anything suspicious," Evan replied. "I was just leaving." Halstead's lips pressed together. "You got ID on you?" Evan reached into his jacket, careful, slow. He handed over his driver's license. Halstead studied it longer than necessary. "Evan Carter," he read aloud. "Address doesn't match this property." "It doesn't," Evan said evenly. "That's my primary residence downtown." Halstead looked up. "So whose place is this?" Evan met his gaze. "Mine." The air shifted. Halstead laughed softly. "You're telling me you own this mansion?" "Yes." Silence hung between them. A breeze moved through the palms. Somewhere nearby, a sprinkler clicked on. "Step away from the gate," Halstead said. Evan didn't move. "Am I being detained?" Halstead's jaw tightened. "You're being questioned." "Then I'm answering." Evan said, "I own the property. I can provide documentation." Halstead reached for his radio. "Dispatch. I've got a male exiting a secured residence claiming ownership. I need verification." Evan felt eyes on him now. Curtains shifted in neighboring houses. A woman across the street paused mid-walk. Phone already half raised. "Sir," Evan said, keeping his voice calm, "I don't consent to a search, and I'd like a supervisor if there's an issue." Halstead's sunglasses tilted slightly as he leaned closer. "You don't get to set the terms here." The cuffs came out faster than Evan expected. "Turn around." Evan's heart thudded. "Officer, this is unnecessary." "Hands behind your back." The metal closed around his wrists, cold and unforgiving. Too tight. A murmur rippled from the sidewalk. Someone whispered, "What did he do?" Evan stood still as Halstead guided him toward the patrol car, grip firm at his elbow. "This is my home," Evan said, louder now. "You're making a mistake." Halstead opened the rear door. "We'll sort that out at the station." As Evan was pushed inside, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Maya, no doubt. He couldn't answer. The door slammed shut. Through the glass, Evan watched Halstead walk back toward the gate, examining it again, as if it might confess something new. Behind the mansion walls, cameras recorded everything. Evan leaned his head back against the seat, breath shallow but controlled. This wasn't about proof. It never was. The holding room smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. Evan sat on a narrow metal bench bolted to the floor, his wrists aching where the cuffs had been removed minutes earlier. The echo of the gate closing still rang in his head, louder than the slamming doors and clipped voices beyond the frosted glass. Officer Halstead stood across the room, filling out paperwork at a counter. He didn't look rushed. He didn't look angry. He looked settled, like a man doing something routine. Evan cleared his throat. "Am I being charged with something?" Halstead didn't look up. "We're still determining that." "I asked what I'm being charged with," Evan said more firmly. Halstead paused, pen hovering. "Suspicion of trespassing. Possible burglary." Evan let out a slow breath. "On my own property." Halstead finally turned. "That's what you say." Evan felt something sharp twist in his chest. "I offered proof. You offered words." A younger officer entered, carrying a clipboard. He glanced at Evan, then quickly looked away. "Fingerprinting's ready," the younger officer said. Halstead nodded. "Let's move." Evan stood. "Am I under arrest?" Halstead gestured toward the door. "You're not free to leave." That was the answer. They led him down a narrow hallway lined with scuffed gray paint and bulletin boards cluttered with faded notices. Every step felt heavier than the last, not because he didn't understand the process, but because he did. In the fingerprinting room, Evan placed his fingers on the glass panel as instructed. The machine beeped. "Other hand," the technician said, voice flat. Evan complied. As the screen flashed green, Evan glanced at the technician. "You know this is unnecessary." The technician shrugged slightly. "Not my call." It never was. Back in the interview room, Evan sat across from Halstead at a metal table. A camera blinked red in the corner. Halstead slid a form across the table. "Sign here." "What is it?" "Acknowledgement of detention." Evan didn't touch it. "I want a lawyer." Halstead's lips thinned. "That's your right." "Then I won't be answering further questions." Halstead leaned back in his chair, studying him. "Funny thing," he said, "people who own places like that usually don't mind proving it." Evan met his gaze. "People who assume they don't own places like that usually don't mind overstepping." The air went tight. Halstead stood abruptly. "Sit tight." The door shut behind him with a solid click. Evan stared at the table, at the small scratches etched into its surface. He thought of the house, the quiet hallways, the framed photos he'd never bothered to hang properly, the office where contracts waited to be signed tomorrow morning. All of it suddenly felt very far away. Minutes passed, then more. When the door opened again, a woman stepped in. Sergeant Linda Morales. Her hair was pulled back tightly, her expression professional but wary. "I'm Sergeant Morales," she said. "I'm told there's a disagreement about property ownership." "That's one way to put it," Evan said. She sat across from him. "Mr. Carter, do you have documentation proving ownership of the residence on Hawthorne Ridge?" "Yes," Evan said. My attorney and business partner can provide it immediately. Morales nodded. We're reaching out to verify. Why wasn't that done before I was arrested? Evan asked. Morales' mouth tightened. Officers make judgment calls in the field. Based on what? Evan asked quietly. She didn't answer. Halstead returned, placing a folder on the table. Dispatch couldn't confirm ownership yet. Records take time. Evan laughed once, sharp and humorless. Funny, my bank confirms it instantly. Halstead ignored him. Until verification comes through, you'll remain here. Morales glanced at Halstead. Mark. I followed procedure, Halstead said. Guy leaving a mansion he doesn't live at. No proof. Suspicious behavior. Evan leaned forward. Leaving a house calmly with keys is suspicious? Halstead met his eyes. In that neighborhood? Yes. The words landed heavy. Morales exhaled slowly. Mr. Carter, do you consent to us contacting your attorney? Yes. Evan said immediately. The door closed again. Time stretched. Evan's phone buzzed repeatedly on the table, just out of reach. He could see Maya's name flash before the screen, went dark again. When Morales returned, she wasn't alone. A man in a suit followed her in, adjusting his tie. I'm Detective Harris, the man said. I've reviewed the initial report. Evan looked at him, and Harris opened the folder. It states you were observed exiting a secured property without clear indication of residency. That's not accurate, Evan said. I locked the gate. I had keys. I explained ownership. Harris glanced at Halstead. Is that correct? Halstead shrugged. He claimed ownership. Claimed. Evan echoed. As opposed to what existing? Morales shot Evan a look. Mr. Carter. Evan leaned back, jaw tight. I want my lawyer. Harris nodded. That's been arranged. As if on cue, the door opened and Maya Lawson stepped in, phone still in hand, eyes sharp with restrained fury. Evan, she said, relief and anger colliding in her voice. Ms. Lawson, Morales said, we're verifying. Already verified, Maya cut in, placing documents on the table. Deed, tax records, utility bills, all in his name. The house is held under Carter Holdings, LLC, which he owns outright. Silence. Harris flipped through the papers, his expression changing with each page. Morales looked at Halstead. Mark. Halstead's jaw worked. Records weren't available at the time. They were, Maya said. You didn't check. Harris closed the folder. Mr. Carter will be released. Evan stood slowly. His legs felt unsteady, but his voice didn't. Am I free to go? Morales nodded. Yes. Halstead avoided his eyes. As Evan reached for his phone, Harris spoke again. There will be an internal review. Evan paused. Good. He turned toward the door. Behind him, Halstead muttered, Just doing my job. Evan stopped, then looked back. No, he said quietly. You were doing what you thought you'd get away with. And somewhere in the system, paperwork had already begun telling a very different story. The night air felt thinner when Evan stepped outside the precinct. Cold, too clean, like it had nothing to do with what had just happened inside. The automatic doors slid shut behind him with a soft hiss, erasing the echoes of clanking gates and clipped voices as if they'd never existed. Cameras were already waiting. A woman with a microphone pivoted toward him. Mr. Carter, were you wrongfully detained tonight? Evan stopped. Maya's hand touched his arm, a silent question. He nodded once. Yes, Evan said. I was. Flashbulbs popped. A man shouted. Do you believe this was racially motivated? Evan felt his throat tighten. He thought of the cuffs. The neighbors. The word suspicious. I believe assumptions were made, he said carefully, that shouldn't be made about anyone. Maya guided him toward her car as questions followed, stacking over each other. By the time the door shut, Evan's hands were shaking. You okay? Maya asked, starting the engine. Evan stared straight ahead. I don't know. At home is home. The gate slid open smoothly. The house greeted him with soft lighting and quiet music he didn't remember turning on. Evan stood in the foyer, listening to the emptiness hum. "This is supposed to feel safe," he said. Maya set her bag down. "It will again." He didn't answer. The next morning, the video surfaced. A neighbor's phone recording, shaky but clear enough. Evan at the gate. Halstead's posture. "The cuffs. The line. We'll figure out who you stole it from." By noon, it was everywhere. Evan sat at his kitchen table, laptop open, news tabs multiplying. Comment sections filled faster than he could read them. Why was he there? That officer did his job. If he really owned it, why didn't he prove it? Maya paced. "They're already spinning it." Evan rubbed his temples. "Of course they are." At 2:00, Evan's attorney, David Klein, arrived with a thick folder under his arm. "First," David said, settling into a chair, "you did everything right." Evan laughed softly. "Did I?" "Yes," David said. "You stayed calm. You asserted your rights. And you didn't escalate. And I still ended up in cuffs." David didn't argue that. "We'll request the incident report," David continued. "Body cam footage. Dispatch logs." Maya crossed her arms. "And then we see how far the truth bends on paper." They didn't have to wait long. The report arrived that evening. Evan read it once. Then again. Slowly. Subject appeared evasive. Unable to provide proof of ownership. Officer detained subject for public safety. Evan's hands clenched. "This is a lie." David nodded. "It's a version." Maya leaned over his shoulder. "He says Evan was argumentative." Evan looked up. "I asked for a supervisor." David closed the folder. "This is where paper walls go up. Internal affairs. The department. They'll protect the report before they protect you." Evan stared at the words on the page, the way they flattened him into something suspicious, something unnamed. "I want this corrected," Evan said. David met his eyes. "That's not how it works." The internal affairs interview was scheduled for the following week. Until then, the story grew legs. Talk radio hosts debated whether Evan was playing the race card. Social media split into camps. Some dug into Evan's business history, looking for cracks that weren't there. A stranger emailed him. "If you can afford that house, why are you complaining?" Evan didn't reply. The day of the interview, Evan sat in a gray room with a one-way mirror. Morales was there again, along with 2 internal affairs investigators. "Mr. Carter," one of them said, "we're here to gather facts." Evan nodded. "Then I'll give them." He walked them through the encounter. The questions, the cuffs, the line. When he finished, one investigator asked, "Did Officer Halstead use any slurs?" "No," Evan said. "Threaten violence?" "No." The investigator nodded, scribbling notes. "But," Evan continued, "he didn't have to." They looked up. "The assumption was a weapon," Evan said. "The certainty that I didn't belong." Morales shifted in her seat. The investigator cleared his throat. "We'll compare statements." Halstead's interview came next. Evan didn't hear it, but he read the summary later. Halstead claimed Evan was uncooperative, claimed the neighborhood had a history of break-ins, claimed procedure, claimed the body cam footage contradicted him. The security footage from Evan's house destroyed him. The gate, the keys, the comm. When internal affairs requested the footage, Evan watched Halstead's face carefully. Just once. On the day it was disclosed. For the first time, the officer looked uncertain. The department issued a statement. "The incident is under review. We take all concerns seriously. No conclusions have been reached." The mayor's office released a separate comment about community trust. Evan watched it all from his living room. Lights off, screen glowing. "They're slow walking this," Maya said. "Yes," Evan replied. "They want it quiet." David called later that night. "They've offered an informal resolution." Evan sat up. "Meaning?" "An apology. No admission of wrongdoing." Evan laughed again, this time without humor. "So he keeps his badge." "For now," David said. Evan stood and walked to the window. looking out at the driveway where the patrol car had been parked. "No," Evan said. "I won't take it." There was a pause. "You understand this will get harder?" Evan nodded, though David couldn't see him. "It already is." After the call, Evan stayed at the window. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt empty. It felt watched, not by cameras or neighbors, but by a system waiting to see if he would get tired. He wasn't tired. Not yet. Somewhere downtown, files were being moved, emails rewritten, language softened, paper walls rising. But Evan had learned something important. Walls built from paper could burn. The envelope arrived without ceremony. No knock, no warning. Just a thick manila sleeve slipped through Evan's mail slot like an afterthought. He carried it inside, set it on the kitchen counter, and stared at it longer than he meant to. "This is it," Maya said quietly. Evan nodded. "I know." They opened it together. The internal affairs preliminary findings were printed in clean black ink, language smoothed until it almost felt polite. Evan read slowly, forcing himself not to skim. Officer acted within perceived scope of duty. Subject behavior interpreted as non-compliant. No conclusive evidence of racial bias. Evan stopped reading. "That's it?" he asked. Maya leaned closer, jaw tightening. "They turned certainty into perceived. They turned your calm into non-compliant." Evan flipped the page. There was again Halstead's version, polished and protected. "Listen to this," Evan said, reading aloud. "Officer reasonably believes subject did not belong on property due to inconsistencies." "Inconsistencies," Maya echoed. "Like your skin." Evan exhaled sharply. He felt something dull settle in his chest, heavier than anger. Recognition, again. The system doing exactly what it was designed to do. David arrived an hour later, glasses already perched on his forehead, legal pad under his arm. "They're hedging," he said after reading the report. "Leaving themselves room." "Room for what?" Evan asked. "Room to say nobody's at fault." Evan looked up. "And the lies?" David tapped the page. "They call them interpretations." Silence filled the kitchen. "I want the full report corrected," Evan said finally. "Every false line." David hesitated. "That means escalation." "Good." David nodded slowly. "Then we go formal. Civil filing. Discovery. Media scrutiny." Maya's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then looked at Evan. "You're not going to like this." "What now?" The department leaked a clarification to the press. Evan took the phone. The headline read, "Police say detention of local businessman was misunderstood." He scrolled. "Authorities emphasize officer safety and procedural caution." No charges were filed. Incident reflects broader challenges faced by law enforcement. They're turning this into sympathy for them. Evan said. "Yes," Maya replied, "because it works." Evan handed the phone back and stood, pacing. "They want me quiet." "Grateful." David watched him. "This is the point most people step back." Evan stopped. "I'm not most people." That night, Evan couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the cuffs tightening, felt the weight of Halstead's certainty pressing down on him. He replayed the report in his head, the way language erased context, emotion, truth. By morning, he had made a decision. "I want the report public," Evan said. David raised an eyebrow. "Once it's out, you lose control of the narrative." "I never had control," Evan replied. "They did." The documents went live that afternoon. Maya coordinated with a journalist she trusted. Evan approved the release of the footage. The report, the contradictions laid out side by side. The response was immediate. Experts dissected the language. Former officers spoke out about coded phrasing. Civil rights advocates highlighted the pattern. And then the past surfaced. A man named Jerome Walker came forward first. Arrested 3 years ago during a traffic stop that escalated based on suspicion. Charges dropped. Complaint dismissed. Then another. And another. Same officer. Same phrasing. David spread the files across Evan's dining table. This is no longer about one incident. Evan studied the names, The dates. It never was. The department reacted fast this time. A second statement. Sharper. More defensive. We reject any implication of systemic misconduct. Officer Halstead has served with distinction. Evan watched the press conference on mute. Halstead stood behind the chief, arms crossed, expression firm, unbothered. He still thinks he's right, Maya said. Yes, Evan replied, and that's the problem. Internal emails leaked 2 days later. An anonymous source. Conversations between supervisors discussing optics. Suggestions to limit exposure. One line stood out to Evan, cold and casual. We can't set a precedent every time someone claims bias. Claims. Evan read it twice. They're afraid, David said. Not of you, of the pattern. Evan nodded. Patterns threaten structures. That afternoon, Evan was summoned to a meeting downtown. City Hall. Closed doors. The room was sleek, glass and steel, city skyline stretching behind the mayor's desk. The mayor didn't offer coffee. Mr. Carter, he said, hands folded. We regret your experience. Evan didn't respond. We want to resolve this constructively, the mayor continued. Privately. Maya stiffened beside him. Evan leaned forward. What does privately mean? A settlement. Reforms under review. No prolonged litigation. And Officer Halstead? The mayor paused. Personnel matters are internal. Evan smiled once, then, so nothing changes. That's not fair, the mayor said. It's accurate, Evan replied. The mayor sighed. You have to understand the balance we maintain. Evan stood. You have to understand that balance is built on people like me staying silent. They left without shaking hands. Outside, Evan paused on the steps, the city humming around them. They think this will blow over, Maya said. Evan looked out at the street, at strangers moving through their lives, unaware of the machinery grinding quietly above them. It won't, he said. That night, Evan drafted a statement of his own. Not angry, not pleading. Precise. He talked about paper walls, about language as a shield, about how being released without charges didn't mean being unharmed. When he finished, he sent it to David. Once this goes out, David replied, there's no walking back. Evan stared at the message, then at his reflection in the darkened window. I'm not walking back, he typed. As the statement went live, phones across the city lit up, and inside the department, someone quietly removed Officer Halstead's name from the upcoming commendations list. It wasn't justice, but it was a first crack. The first call came just after sunrise. Evan was standing at the kitchen sink, staring at the faint bruise still visible on his wrist, when his phone rang. A known number. He let it ring twice before answering. Mr. Carter? A man asked. Yes. My name is Jerome Walker. I think we should talk. Evan closed his eyes. About what? About Officer Halstead. They met later that afternoon at a quiet cafe downtown. Jerome arrived early, already seated, hands wrapped tightly around a mug he hadn't touched. He looked nervous in the way people do when they expect to be dismissed. I wasn't sure you'd come, Jerome said. I wasn't sure I should, Evan replied honestly, but I'm here. Jerome nodded. 3 years ago, Halstead pulled me over, said my car matched the description, asked where I got it, asked where I got the money for it. Evan didn't interrupt. He searched it, Jerome continued, said I consented. I didn't. Found nothing. Still took me in. For what? Evan asked. Jerome laughed bitterly. For resisting. Charges were dropped 2 weeks later. Internal Affairs said it was inconclusive. Inconclusive, Evan echoed. Jerome leaned forward. When I saw your video, I recognized the look. Not on his face. On yours. Evan felt his chest tighten. The moment you realize it won't matter what you say. Yes, Jerome said softly. That moment. By the time Evan left the cafe, he had 3 more messages waiting. Then 5. By the end of the week, 12. Different neighborhoods. Different years. Same officer. Same language. David laid the files out across the conference table in his office. This is beyond coincidence. Maya flipped through statements. Same phrases. Suspicious behavior. Non-compliant tone. Evan stood back, arms crossed. It's a template. Yes, David said, and templates are taught. The press caught on quickly. A local investigative piece reframed the story. Not Evan Carter, wealthy homeowner, but Officer Mark Halstead, veteran cop of the pattern of complaints that went nowhere. The department responded with silence, then defensiveness. At a press briefing, the chief insisted each incident was reviewed independently. Evan watched the clip on his phone. That's the problem. Maya nodded. They never looked at the whole picture. The city council announced a public forum on policing and trust. Evan was invited to speak. You don't have to, David said. It's voluntary. Evan thought of Jerome, of the others who hadn't called yet. I'll go, he said. The auditorium was packed. Cameras lined the back wall. Officers stood along the sides, arms folded, expressions unreadable. Evan stepped up to the microphone. I'm not here because I enjoy this, he began. I'm here because silence is expensive. A murmur rippled through the room. He told his story plainly. No theatrics, just facts. Then he spoke about patterns, how single incidents are easy to dismiss, but repetition tells the truth. When the same assumptions keep appearing, Evan said, we need to ask where they come from. An officer in the crowd shifted. Afterward, a woman approached Evan, eyes wet. My son didn't have your resources, she said, but he had the same officer. That night, Evan sat alone in his living room, lights off, city glow spilling in through the windows. The house felt heavy with voices that weren't there. He hadn't asked for this role, but it had found him anyway. Across town, Officer Halstead sat at his kitchen table, staring at his phone. Headlines scrolled past, each one sharper than the last. Pattern of complaints emerges. Officer under renewed scrutiny. His wife stood in the doorway. Mark. She said, what's going on? He didn't answer. At roll call the next morning. Conversation stopped when Halstead entered the room. Not hostile. Cautious. The lieutenant cleared his throat. Officer Halstead, you're assigned to desk duty pending further review. Halstead stiffened. For what? Administrative reasons. Is this about the Carter thing? Halstead snapped. The lieutenant met his eyes. It's about everything. Halstead pushed back his chair. I did my job. Sit down, the lieutenant said. Halstead didn't. Meanwhile, Evan received another call, this one from a civil rights organization offering support. We've seen this before, the woman on the line said. It takes one case to open the door. Evan looked at the documents spread across his desk. I don't want to be the face of this. You already are, she replied gently. The department announced a formal review of Officer Halstead's record. It wasn't an apology, but it was movement. David smiled grimly. They can't unsee it now. Evan nodded. Neither can I. A week later, Evan met Jerome again, this time with others. 5 men sat around a table, stories overlapping, finishing each other's sentences. It wasn't just him, one said. It was how fast everyone believed him. Evan listened, absorbing the weight of it. This is what they count on. Evan said, that we don't compare notes. The men nodded. Outside, reporters waited. Inside, something shifted. The city released preliminary findings, discrepancies, procedural failures, recommendations. Officer Halstead was named directly. At the end of the report, a single line stood out. Pattern of conduct indicates need for disciplinary action. Evan read it twice. That night, he returned to the mansion late. The gate opened, smooth and obedient. He parked in the driveway and sat in the car, engine off, listening to quiet. He thought of the first night. The cuffs, the certainty. Patterns had names now, faces, files. He stepped out of the car and looked up at the house, not as refuge, not as symbol, but as witness. The system hadn't broken, but it had been forced to look at itself. And once something is seen, it can't be unseen. The hearing room was colder than Evan expected. Not physically, though the air conditioning hummed with unnecessary force, but emotionally, like warmth had been designed out of space on purpose. Gray walls, long table, a seal mounted behind the panel, where 3 officials sat in stiff-backed chairs. This was where language went to be sanitized. Evan sat beside David, hands folded, posture steady. Maya sat behind them, notebook open, eyes alert. Across the room, Officer Halstead occupied his own table. Uniform pressed, expression neutral. Too neutral. The chairwoman cleared her throat. This hearing concerns allegations of misconduct by Officer Mark Halstead. Allegations. Evan focused on his breathing. The first hour passed in procedural framing. Jurisdiction. Scope. Definitions. Words stacked like bricks to slow momentum. Evan felt the old frustration creep in. The sense that justice, like everything else, required permission. Then testimony began. Halstead spoke first. He described the stop in clinical terms. The subject exited secured property. I initiated contact due to recent reports of theft in the area. Evan listened carefully. He appeared defensive. Halstead continued. His answers were inconsistent. David leaned toward Evan. He's sticking to the script. Evan nodded. He wasn't surprised. When questioned about the handcuffing, Halstead said, I acted in the interest of officer safety. One of the panelists asked, Did the subject make any threatening gestures? No. Did he attempt to flee? No. Did he refuse to identify himself? No. A pause settled over the room. Then explain the escalation, the panelist said. Halstead straightened. Experience. That single word hung in the air. When it was Evan's turn, he rose slowly and took the seat at the witness table. The microphone felt closer than it needed to be. Mr. Carter, the chairwoman said, please describe the incident in your own words. Evan did. He spoke calmly, deliberately. He described the gate, the questions, the shift in tone, the cuffs. I want to be clear, Evan said. I was compliant. I was respectful. And I was not believed. A panelist leaned forward. Why do you think that was? Evan paused. He could feel eyes on him. Some curious, some skeptical, some already decided. Because I didn't match the assumption, he said. Not of criminal behavior. Of ownership. Silence followed. David stood. We would like to submit evidence. The screen behind the panel flickered to life. Security footage. The gate closing. Evan locking it. His posture relaxed. Halstead approaching. The footage ran uninterrupted. When the cuffs came out, a murmur rippled through the room. Then body cam footage. Audio clear. We'll figure out who you stole it from. The words echoed, harsher in the quiet room than they had been on the street. Halstead shifted in his chair. One of the panelists turned to him. Officer, do you dispute this recording? Halstead hesitated. No. Do you believe that statement was appropriate? Halstead opened his mouth, closed it, then said, It was said in the heat of the moment. In reference to what evidence of theft? The panelist pressed. Halstead didn't answer immediately. Officer, the chairwoman prompted. Halstead exhaled. There was none at that time. The room changed then. Subtly, like air moving after a sealed door cracked open. The panel moved on to patterns. David introduced prior complaints. Similar language. Similar outcomes. These were each dismissed independently, David said. But when viewed collectively, they reveal consistency. A panelist frowned. Officer Halstead, are you aware of these complaints? Yes, Halstead said tightly. And none were sustained. Do you believe that indicates no wrongdoing? The panelist asked. Or a failure to detect it? Halstead's jaw clenched. I believe I was doing my job. Evan watched him closely, not with anger, but with clarity. This wasn't malice. It was certainty. When public comment was allowed, Jerome Walker stood. I was told my case didn't matter because it stood alone, Jerome said. Now I know it didn't. Another man followed. Then another. Each story added weight. By the time the panel recessed, the room felt different. Heavier. Fuller. Outside, reporters gathered. Mr. Carter. One called, "Do you believe this hearing will lead to accountability?" Evan considered the question. "I believe it makes avoidance harder." The panel returned an hour later. The chairwoman spoke carefully. "Based on the evidence presented, this panel finds substantial inconsistencies in Officer Halstead's account." Halstead stared straight ahead. "We recommend disciplinary action," she continued, "and referral for further review. Not fired, not exonerated, but not protected either." Evan felt a strange mix of relief and restraint. This wasn't the end, but it wasn't nothing. Afterward, in the hallway, Halstead approached Evan. "Can I say something?" Halstead asked. Evan hesitated, then nodded. Halstead swallowed. "I never thought myself as that guy." Evan met his eyes. "Most people don't." Halstead nodded slowly, then walked away. Maya joined Evan, her hand brushing his arm. "You okay?" "Yes," Evan said, then corrected himself. "I will be." That evening, Evan returned home. The mansion was quiet, but not empty. It felt present, like it had been listening. He sat at the kitchen table, exhaustion settling in. David called. "They'll announce a decision within weeks." "Good," Evan said. "You changed the frame." David added, "That matters." Evan hung up and stared at the table where documents still lay scattered. Names, dates, patterns. Justice wasn't loud. It didn't arrive with sirens or speeches. Sometimes it arrived as a pause, a hesitation, a crack in certainty. Evan stood and turned off the lights, leaving the room in shadow. Tomorrow, the city would decide what to do with the truth that had been shown. But tonight, Evan allowed himself one quiet thought. For the first time since the gate closed, he felt heard. The announcement came on a Tuesday morning, delivered in the careful cadence of official restraint. Evan heard it on the radio while making coffee. The anchor's voice was steady, neutral, trained to soften impact. "Officer Mark Halstead has been placed on indefinite, unpaid suspension pending final disciplinary review." Evan didn't move. The coffee maker clicked off behind him, steam rising into the quiet kitchen. Suspension, not termination, not exoneration. A hinge. Maya called seconds later. "You hear it?" "Yes." "They're slow walking the rest." "I know," Evan said, but they couldn't ignore it anymore. By noon, the department released a longer statement. It acknowledged procedural failures and language inconsistent with departmental values. It avoided the word racism entirely. Evan read it once, then set his phone down. "That's their compromise," David said later, during a call. "Enough to look responsive, not enough to admit structure." "And the hearing recommendation?" Evan asked. "Under review." Everything was always under review. The civil settlement offer arrived the next day. 7 figures. Confidentiality clause attached. A requirement that Evan refrained from public commentary about the department. Maya stared at the document. "They're buying silence." "They're buying control," David corrected. "Silence is just a packaging." Evan read the clause carefully. "What happens if I refuse?" David didn't hesitate. "They fight harder." Evan leaned back in his chair. "Then we fight longer." The counteroffer went out without the non-disclosure clause. 2 hours later, the city declined. That night, Evan attended a small gathering organized by the civil rights group. No press, no speeches, just people who would follow the story quietly, intensely. Jerome was there. So was a woman whose son had been arrested years earlier. "I didn't think anything would come of this," she told Evan. "But now my son believes someone sees him." Evan felt the weight of that settle into his bones. Across the city, Halstead cleared out his locker. A few officers avoided eye contact. Others offered stiff nods. No one congratulated him. No one openly condemned him either. The lieutenant watched from his office doorway. "You'll be notified when the review concludes." Halstead nodded. "Am I fired?" "Not yet." Halstead laughed once. "That's supposed to help?" The lieutenant didn't answer. At home, Halstead's wife read the news online, her face pale. "They're saying you targeted people," she said. I did my job, Halstead replied automatically. She looked at him. Did you? He didn't respond. Days passed, then weeks. The city council voted to implement new training requirements. Body cam review protocols were adjusted. A committee was formed. Incremental changes. Measured language. Evan watched from a distance, refusing interviews, declining invitations to panels. You don't have to carry this forever, Maya reminded him. I know, Evan said, but I won't pretend it's over. The final decision came quietly. Officer Mark Halstead was terminated for conduct unbecoming and failure to adhere to departmental standards. No press conference. Just a notice posted online late Friday afternoon. Evan read it alone in his study. He closed the browser and sat back, waiting for something. Relief, triumph, closure. None of it came. Instead, there was a low ache, a recognition of cost. That evening, Evan drove aimlessly through the city, past the precinct, past neighborhoods that looked like his, and ones that didn't, past people who would never know his name, but had followed the outcome like a weather report. At a red light, a young black man crossed the street, hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets, shoulders tense as a patrol car passed. Evan watched the boy's eyes track the cruiser until it disappeared. He felt something twist inside him. Back at the mansion, the gate opened without complaint. Evan parked and sat in the car longer than usual, engine idling, night pressing in. This place had been evidence once. Now it was just a house again. Inside, Evan poured a drink he didn't want and stood by the window, city lights blinking like distant signals. The settlement negotiations resumed the following week. This time, the city removed the non-disclosure clause. Evan signed, not because it erased anything, but because it redirected energy. He announced the creation of a legal advocacy fund the next morning, seeded with his own money, focused on representation and documentation. Patterns only exist when stories connect, Evan said in the brief statement he released. This fund exists to make sure they do. The response was immediate. Donations followed. Volunteers. Messages from people he'd never met. David called that night. You changed the equation. Evan looked around the quiet room. I just refused to disappear. Months later, the gate malfunctioned. It stuck halfway closed, iron bars frozen mid-slide. Evan stood at the control panel, pressing the button again, then again. Nothing. A maintenance truck arrived within the hour. A young technician climbed out, clipboard in hand. Sorry about this, the technician said. System glitched. Evan watched him work, tools clinking softly. Everything good now, the technician said finally, stepping back. The gate slid open, smooth and sure. Evan nodded. Thanks. As the truck pulled away, Evan stood alone in the driveway, the house rising behind him, solid and unremarkable. The memory of the cuffs hadn't faded, but it no longer defined the space. Fallout wasn't just collapse. Sometimes it was what settled after the dust. Quiet, altered, irreversible. Evan turned toward the house and walked inside, leaving the gate open just a second longer than necessary. Not as defiance, as proof that fear no longer owned the entrance. The first time Evan returned to the gate after everything ended, he didn't bring his keys. He stood at the edge of the driveway just after sunrise, hands empty, watching light spill across the iron bars. Morning birds cut through the quiet. Somewhere down the hill, traffic hummed like a distant river. The house behind him felt awake, not imposing, not symbolic, just present. He waited. The gate opened automatically, sensors recognizing him without question. Evan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Inside, life had resumed in small, careful ways. Contractors came and went. Meetings filled his calendar again. The house hosted dinners that felt almost normal. Almost. But something stayed with him. He noticed how his shoulders tensed when sirens passed. How he scanned faces when uniformed officers entered a room. How silence sometimes felt louder than noise. Trauma didn't announce itself. It lingered. The advocacy fund grew faster than Evan expected. Requests arrived daily. Emails written in careful tones. Messages typed late at night. Stories that echoed familiar patterns. I don't know if this matters. I've never told anyone this. They said there was no proof. Evan read every message. He didn't answer all of them personally, but he made sure none went unanswered. One afternoon, Jerome visited the mansion for the first time. I wasn't sure this place was real, Jerome said, standing in the living room, glancing around. Evan smiled faintly. It wasn't for a while. They sat on the back patio, coffee cooling between them. You ever wish you hadn't pushed this? Jerome asked. Evan considered it. Sometimes, he said honestly, mostly when I'm tired. Jerome nodded. But then I remember how tired I was before. They sat in companionable silence, the pool reflecting sky like a held breath. The city invited Evan to consult on policy revisions. He declined the formal role, but sent recommendations. Clear ones, documented ones. Language mattered. Who got believed mattered. Some changes were adopted, others stalled. Evan didn't pretend it was enough. He had learned not to confuse motion with transformation. Months later, Evan attended a quiet ceremony at a community center. No cameras, just folding chairs and nervous applause. The Advocacy Fund awarded its first full legal grant. A young man stood at the podium, hands shaking slightly. I didn't think anyone would stand with me, he said, but someone did. Evan didn't clap loudly. He didn't need to. On the drive home, Evan passed the precinct without realizing it at first. The building looked smaller than he remembered, less permanent. He slowed at the intersection, then continued on. Not everything required confrontation anymore. That night, Evan walked the grounds of the mansion alone. The hedges were neatly trimmed, the stone steps cool beneath his feet. He paused near the gate, fingers brushing the iron. Ownership had once felt like armor. Now it felt like responsibility. He thought about the neighbors who had watched him in silence, about the ones who had filmed, about the ones who had said nothing afterward. Fear wore many masks. So did courage. Inside, Evan poured a glass of water and stood at the kitchen counter, watching the reflection ripple slightly. His phone buzzed with a news alert he didn't open. He didn't need to. Some stories were finished, even if the world kept talking. Before bed, Evan checked the security feed out of habit. The driveway was empty. The gate stood open, waiting. He didn't close it right away. The next morning, Evan met Maya for breakfast downtown. The cafe buzzed with ordinary life, clinking dishes, muted laughter, the low hum of conversation. You ever think about selling the house? Maya asked casually. Evan shook his head. No, even after everything? Especially after everything. Maya smiled. That makes sense. As they parted ways, Evan caught his reflection in the cafe window. He looked the same. And not at all. Power hadn't protected him. Visibility had. Weeks later, Evan received a handwritten letter. The envelope was plain, the handwriting careful. Mr. Carter, I was there the day you were arrested. I didn't say anything. I should have. I'm sorry. No return address. Evan folded the letter and placed it in a drawer with others like it. Not trophies. Reminders. Progress didn't always look like justice. Sometimes it looked like reckoning delayed. On the anniversary of the arrest, Evan returned to the gate at dusk. The sky burned orange and violet, shadows stretching long across the driveway. He stood where the patrol car had once idled. He closed his eyes. The memory came back sharp. The click of cuffs, the certainty in Halstead's voice, the moment he realized proof wasn't the issue. Then it passed. Evan opened his eyes and pressed the remote. The gate closed. Then, after a pause, he opened it again, not because he had to, because he could. Inside the mansion, the lights came on one by one, warm and ordinary. Evan stepped forward, crossing the threshold without hesitation. The world outside still carried its weight. The system still resisted change. Stories like it still repeated in quieter streets, less visible homes. But something had shifted. A crack had formed. And cracks, Evan knew now, were how light got in. He walked inside and let the door close gently behind him, not as a shield, not as retreat, but as a choice. What remained wasn't vengeance. It wasn't closure. It was presence, and presence, sustained and unafraid, was its own kind of justice. The invitation arrived folded once, slipped under Evan's door like an afterthought. No letterhead, no city seal, just a simple card with location, a date, and a time. Community town hall, public listening session. Evan held it between his fingers longer than necessary. Listening, not speaking, not explaining, just listening. He almost didn't go. The hall was smaller than he expected. Old wooden floors, folding chairs, a stage that had hosted graduations and retirement speeches, and local debates no one remembered clearly. The lights were warm, imperfect, human. Evan took a seat near the back. He wasn't announced. No one turned. He liked it that way. The moderator welcomed everyone and explained the rules. No shouting, no interruptions. 5 minutes each. The first speaker was a young woman with a tremor in her voice. She spoke about her brother. The second, an older man, talked about being stopped so often he memorized badge numbers like prayers. Evan listened, not as a symbol, not as a case study, as a person sitting among others carrying the same quiet weight. When his turn came, the moderator hesitated. "Mr. Carter, would you like to speak?" Evan stood slowly. "I didn't come to add anything," he said. "I came to hear what does make the news." A murmur moved through the room, not disappointment, not praise. Something softer. Evan sat back down. Afterward, outside under the dim streetlights, a teenager approached him. "My mom says you own that big house on Hawthorne Ridge." The boy said, eyes wide but steady. Evan smiled faintly. "I do." The boy nodded. "They didn't believe you." "No," Evan said. "They didn't." The boy thought for a moment. "I believe you." Evan felt the words settle somewhere deep. "Thank you." Driving home, Evan passed Hawthorne Ridge without turning in. He continued down the hill, letting the road carry him elsewhere. Ownership, he had learned, was never just about land. It was about space, about who was allowed to move freely inside it. At the mansion, the lights were off. Evan left them that way as he entered. Moonlight traced familiar lines across the floor, the walls, the staircase he had walked 1,000 times. The house didn't ask anything of him. That was new. He sat at the dining table and opened his laptop. The Advocacy Fund dashboard loaded, numbers updating quietly. Cases ongoing. Wins. Losses. Appeals pending. Progress measured in increments. Evan closed the laptop and leaned back. For the first time since the arrest, he didn't feel the need to document the moment. Weeks passed. Life resumed its unpredictable rhythm. Evan traveled. He missed calls. He laughed more than he expected to. And still, some mornings, the memory returned uninvited. The sound of cuffs. The certainty in Halstead's voice. Evan didn't push it away anymore. He acknowledged it, then moved on. One afternoon, a delivery truck pulled into the driveway. The driver hesitated when Evan stepped outside, eyes flicking between Evan and the house. "You live here?" the driver asked. "Yes," Evan said. The driver nodded, embarrassed. "Sorry, just big place." Evan smiled. "It's just walls." The driver laughed nervously and handed over the package. Inside, Evan opened it to find a framed photo from the Advocacy Fund's first courtroom victory. The young man stood smiling, arms around his mother. On the back, a note, "Because you stayed." Evan placed the frame on the shelf, not prominently, not hidden, just there. That evening, rain fell lightly, tapping against the windows. Evan stood at the gate, watching droplets cling to the iron. For a moment, he imagined patrol car again. The lights, the watchers behind hedges. Then the image faded. He pressed the remote. The gate opened, not as a test, not as proof, as routine. Across the city, another person was being stopped, another assumption made, another report written. Evan knew that. Justice hadn't solved the world, but it had solved something in him. Later, Maya called. "You busy?" "No," Evan said. "Good. Dinner tomorrow. My place. I'll bring dessert." She paused. "You okay?" Evan looked around the quiet house. Rain softened and solid. "Yes," he said, "I really am." After the call, Evan walked upstairs and opened the bedroom window. Cool air rushed in, carrying the scent of wet pavement and jasmine. The city breathed. He thought of the people who had told him to move on, to be grateful, to enjoy what he had. He thought of the ones who couldn't. Evan closed the window and turned off the light. The house still stood, not because it proved anything, but because it had always been his, regardless of who believed it. And tomorrow, and the day after that, Evan would walk through its gate the same way he always had, unannounced, unapologetic, unafraid. That, he understood now, was not defiance. It was belonging, and belonging, claimed, visible, and steady, was a quiet victory no report could erase. The first knock came just after noon. Not sharp, not aggressive, careful. Evan looked up from the documents spread across his desk, surprised by how rarely anyone knocked at the mansion anymore. Visitors usually called ahead, or waited at the gate. He stood, crossed the foyer, and opened the door. 2 police officers stood on the porch, younger than Halstead had been. One black, one white, both stiff with uncertainty. Evan felt the reflex rise in his chest, the brief, involuntary tightening. But it didn't take hold. "Yes," he said calmly. The white officer cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter?" "Yes." "We're conducting a neighborhood follow-up," the officer said. "Just routine outreach." Evan nodded once. "About what?" The black officer shifted, then met Evan's eyes. "About trust." Silence stretched between them. Evan stepped aside. "You can speak from there." The white officer flushed slightly. "Of course. We just want to say, that the department is working to rebuild relationships." Evan studied them. Their posture, their caution, their awareness. "That's good," Evan said. "Rebuilding requires listening." "Yes, sir," the officer replied quickly. Evan held their gaze another second, then nodded. "Take care." As the officer stepped back toward the walkway, Evan closed the door gently behind him. His hands were steady. That was new. Later that afternoon, Evan attended a meeting he hadn't expected to matter much. A closed-door session with investors, city planners, and nonprofit leaders. Urban redevelopment, affordable housing, carefully worded optimism. He listened more than he spoke. At one point, a man across the table said, "We need community buy-in." Evan leaned forward. Buy-in assumes ownership already belongs to someone else. The man blinked. "I just meant." "I know what you meant," Evan said evenly. "Language shapes outcomes." The room went quiet. After the meeting, a woman approached him privately. "You make people uncomfortable," she said, not unkindly. Evan smiled, only when they're used to not being questioned. That evening, Evan drove through Hawthorne Ridge for the first time in months. Slowly, windows down, music low. Some houses looked the same. Others had changed owners. New cars, fresh paint, quiet shifts. A woman watering her lawn glanced up as Evan passed. Recognition flickered across her face. She raised a hand hesitantly. Evan lifted his in return. It felt ordinary. At the mansion, Evan parked and walked the driveway instead of using the remote. His footsteps echoed faintly against the stone. Halfway to the gate, he stopped. He remembered standing here before. Hands cuffed, dignity negotiated, certainty denied. He closed his eyes. Then he opened them and kept walking. Inside, the house welcomed him without ceremony. No music, no alerts, just space. Evan cooked dinner himself that night. Nothing elaborate, just enough. He ate at the kitchen counter, watching dusk soften into night. His phone buzzed with a message from the advocacy fund. A case had been dismissed, another reopened, a third scheduled for hearing. Momentum without illusion. Before bed, Evan sat in the living room, lights low, city shimmering beyond the glass. He thought about permission. How often it had been demanded of him without being named. Permission to be here. Permission to belong. Permission to be believed. He had spent years meeting expectations no one had written down. Never again. The following week, Evan received an invitation to speak at a national conference. Policing, accountability, reform. He declined. Instead, he sent a short response. I'm not an expert on systems. I'm an expert on what happens when they fail. That was enough. On a quiet Sunday morning, Evan walked the grounds barefoot, dew cool beneath his feet. The gate stood open, as it often did now. A delivery cyclist paused at the entrance, uncertain. "Hey," Evan called gently. "You're good." The cyclist smiled in relief and rolled in. No hesitation. No questions. Later, Maya stopped by unannounced, carrying coffee and pastries. "You look lighter," she observed. "I am," Evan said. She glanced toward the open gate. "Still leaving it open?" "Yes." "Why?" Evan thought for a moment. "Because fear prefers barriers." She nodded, understanding. That night, Evan dreamed, not of sirens or cuffs, but walking freely through spaces that had once felt conditional. Offices, streets, rooms filled with people who didn't need convincing. He woke before dawn, heart steady. Standing at the window, Evan watched the city stretch awake. Somewhere mistakes would be made today. Somewhere assumptions would harden into action. But somewhere else, someone would pause, ask differently, choose better. Evan dressed and stepped outside as the sky lightened, the house behind him solid and unremarkable. He crossed the threshold without looking back. No badge followed him. No permission was requested. The world did not change all at once. But Evan had, and that he knew now, was how change actually began, not loudly, not perfectly, but permanently. He walked through the open gate and into the morning, exactly where he belonged.